Hi, this is Paul. I know some of you are waiting for more Synod content. And as I said in the last video that I actually recorded, which was about Synod, I recorded that Friday last week. Saturday was my son's graduation. Sunday, I drove back and forth from Santa Cruz to Living Stones and back again that evening, had some more family time. Monday morning, we had to pack up from the Airbnb. I had lunch with my friend Tim Blackman at Mount Hermon. Because he was up there to do a conference. We talked Synod. This morning I got up. I had email to do, wrote a couple of posts on CRC Voices, continuing to process this. Basically what's happening with respect to Synod right now is sense making. That we had all of these events last week. You had events around the events. You have these conversations like it's crazy that only one of the 6 people on the screen there is actually attending a Christian Reformed church right now. Josh Klumpenhauer grew up in the Christian Reformed church, but all these other people, they're not members of the Christian Reformed church, but they're using it to process things in their own life. And I've heard commentary on some of the commentary from people, positive and negative, on and on and on. So basically what's going on with respect to the CRC Synod is sense-making right now. And that's an important part of the process. You have these events. Now everybody is processing the events, and they're processing the events through each other, through their own filters, through one another, through their coalition. That's happening all over the denomination, even though it's probably only a tiny minority of the denomination that is actually doing that sense-making, and the vast rest of the body is just picking up little snippets and pieces of news from the Banner or CNN or what have you. One of the things that's interesting to do is say, go to the Banner website. That's www.thebanner.org. And if this was your only sense of what happened at Synod, how would Synod look? As opposed to, let's say, watching the videos of Synod, or maybe just seeing that one Jake Tapper comment on CNN, or versus being a delegate. And what I've been doing since then is I've had a almost nonstop string of delegates and others wanting to talk to me about this because I made videos, wanting to have conversation. All those conversations take time. Most of those conversations are face-to-face, but in terms of at church on Sunday, the only person I talked about to Synod was a colleague of mine who was on sabbatical, who with his family was visiting my congregation. So I talked with him afterwards a little bit, and then we went on our way. Other than that, for most people in the Christian Reformed Church, and I've told a number of pastors, many of the people, well, what changed? And in some ways, now this is very, very difficult. For some people, in some ways, nothing changed. The position of the Christian Reformed Church with respect to same-sex marriage is exactly what it was before. Well, was it? Detail, nuance, yada, yada, yada. So then all of the sense-making happens. So I just haven't had time to do much digestion. Probably the last one, incomplete and broken. One of the things that I look at from the Banner is how much sense making is done in the Banner. And this article had a little bit more sense making, but for the most part, the Banner doesn't do a lot of sense making. You have sort of the editorial from the editor of the Banner, but those are so brief and so short, there's not much there. And so what a lot of people rely on, if they look at anything at all, might be what they find on Facebook, younger people on Twitter, let's say, or then if there's just conversation going on between people. Now, I had to do a lot of running around today. One of the members of my church landed in the hospital, so I had to visit him. Like I said, I had a meeting with another colleague over lunch today. He was anxious to talk about Synod, so we talked about Synod for over an hour. This morning I had the Justin Wells business with the documentary. I still have other church things that need to be done because when I'm gone for a little bit of time, there's always stuff that stacks up, and so stuff needs to get done. But after I had to get gas, after going to the hospital, and then I knew that there were some videos that I didn't want to let fall through the cracks, and this is one of them. And again, a big part of this channel is, well, on one hand, Paul, you're talking about the Christian Reformed Church. And on the other hand, you're talking about sense making and all of this stuff about extended bodies and, spiritual bodies with agency. And I've just been working on 1 Corinthians, and we had 12 and 13 and 14 last week as the sermon. Actually, the sermon wound up going quite well. I thought a lot better than the rough draft. Friday, that'll be sort of separated out from the worship service, but if you do enough looking on YouTube, you can find the service. And Rick and I are sort of squashing all of the bugs that we've had in our network system for a while, so getting the recordings better from the services. But I again started re-listening to, which in my opinion was just an outstanding episode of the Universal History with Richard Rowland, and Richard and I are scheduled to have a conversation, so that's coming up, which is really something to look forward to. But this actually pertains to the question, okay, what is the Christian Reformed Church Synod? What does it mean? How does it impact? How do we get our minds around the fact that you've got people in this little corner that are just really wanting to talk about the Synod of the Christian Reformed Church, even though they don't attend a Christian Reformed Church? They might have visited one once or twice. Maybe they listen to this pastor on YouTube who is a minister of them, but they don't have a dog in this fight. Yet they're listening, they're involved, they're curious, they want to do sense making around it, and they want to talk about it. And I thought, this little passage, I wish I had time to play more, but I don't have hardly any time. But I wanted to get something out for Grim Grizz's homeroom tomorrow morning, because if one's going to be a homeroom teacher, one must take their responsibility seriously and have something there in the morning.
I'll be honest with you, right? But so then after this, you have a wide range of stories, like we're talking about, with increasing locality, that nest the local and the specific within the universalizing and the cosmic.
Okay, now slow down. What are we talking about? What this whole business of universal history? And someone just sent me a great clip from Dan Carlin's Hardcore History that dealt with some of this, but I don't have time to unfold that into it. But there's this nested nature of life. So the average member of the Christian Reformed Church is paying absolutely no attention to Synod. Will anything that is said at this Synod actually impact that person? Contrary to what Jake Tapper thinks, no. Because it's just not set up that way. And a lot of the breathless voices at Synod that thought that everything was just, this was the ultimate showdown going on there at Synod. For most people in the Christian Reformed Church, from one Sunday to the next, nothing changes. Now, maybe on bigger time scales, but that involves a whole lot more, because the Synod is only one layer of the Christian Reformed Church. It's only one assembly of the classis, and you have the local council, and all of them have their own types of authority. So here they're talking about this nested nature of reality. And that's really important, because the truth is nobody is a member of the Synod of the Christian Reformed Church. They're member of local congregations of the Christian Reformed Church, not churches, but church. This is very much a nested, complex system.
So in our Universal History series, we've been mainly focused on these kinds of stories. This is what we've been mainly looking at, right? How did people groups, as they converted, nest their identity within the Christian and within the Roman story, even when they themselves maybe fell outside of the empire?
Okay, and so you have these nested identities and these nested stories, and so the Universal History talks about, well, what narrative gateways did they use in order to locate themselves, basically create a worldview, create an arena in which to express agency?
Just to emphasize again before we get into the next section, is that these identities, they stack or they nest, and if you don't understand this, then you will make the mistake, which as I'm going to try to argue, is basically the mistake of 19th and 20th century nationalism.
Yeah. Okay, what he said right there is absolutely crucial, and it's not easy to understand. What do you mean they stack or they nest? He's clearly just looking for metaphors to get some conceptualization about how all of these nested identities work. And the thing that he just said that moment ago,
Yeah.
And if you don't understand this, then you will make the mistake, which, as I'm going to try to argue, is basically the mistake of 19th and 20th century nationalism,
Yeah.
which is to create some.
okay, well, I'm probably not going to have time to get into that nationalism business. I so desperately want to. But there's all sorts of things I so desperately want to get to on this channel. I finished Out of the Silent Planet. I know Luke, people have been pestering me to get back to the Lewis space trilogy, and apparently reading That Hideous Strength has some sort of become a really hot thing right now. Douthit mentioned it in an editorial. You really have to start with Out of the Silent Planet and move all the way through. And gonna have to talk about that book. Also, gonna have to talk about Hunting Magic Eels by Richard Beck, which is a book that is right down the middle of this little corner. But this business about nesting is getting at what I'm still trying to come to language about it, and I'm not good at sort of coming up with just these genius, catchy memes and images like Grim Grizz. He's just got such a gift at that kind of mental verbal cleverness. But I'm not there. But it's basically the mind of a machine, which really sort of comes from Tolkien. Boy, the space trilogy, reading it this time, just completely twisted my noodle when I began to understand exactly what Lewis is doing. I know Luke is really excited right now. It's happening! Yeah, it's happening, Luke. But what's so much of the breathlessness at Synod was rhetorical. I'm not saying it was inauthentic or insincere, not at all, or even necessarily not appropriate in that space. I'm not gonna make any of those claims. But you heard it from Jake Tapper. It's just a complete it's a complete surrender to the mind of the machine. Sort of this capacity to control and dominate from the top. And the truth is, the Christian Reformed Church doesn't really work that way. Human beings and human societies don't really work that way. And since the 18th, 19th, and 20th century, we've had these mass systems, totalitarian systems of mental lockdown, this mind of the machine, the imagination of the machine, the mind of metal that sort of imagines no fringes, no outside, inside. Let's listen to a little bit more, because that's what they're talking about.
Something that's very top heavy, right? Where it's more about, here's the narrative that actually has to control and oppress everything beneath it, rather than serve as a container for it.
Yeah, that's really important. And that's when you can see, I mean, in general, that's when you can see how when any identity goes wrong is
Yeah.
when it doesn't respect the normal nesting of identities that are below it, right? It's like, as let's say a family, a father, it's like, okay, the father is the head of the family, but the father is the head of the family in the way that is there to make his children and his wife be fruitful and succeed and be themselves, right, and have their own lives ultimately. And so that's the way that all identities should function. Now that's the way God functions, and that's the way that all identities should function. That's why people are, when we talk about nationalism, they become very tense, because they always think that all that means is, like you said, the way that the Third Reich presented their nationalism,
Right,
as
yeah.
this completely identity that takes over. But it's not just the Third Reich, right? Napoleon
Right.
and a lot of modern national identity had that feature, but it was not a feature of ancient thinking.
Yeah. I think a much overlooked vision in scripture is Nebuchadnezzar's like first dream, right? The one, I think it's his first one, but the one of the tree,
Mm-hmm.
right? So he has everybody remembers like the vision of like the statue being destroyed by the the
Rock.
stone cut
Yeah.
out of the
It's a sec. I think it's the second. The first vision is the statue.
out of the mountain, and but in his vision of the tree, right, it's the idea of the tree, and of course the tree is the king.
See, he says the tree is the king, and I suspect this is, again, we're on the other side of modernity, and modernity still has its grip. I think the king is the tree. And the order of that is important. Now, again, you're going to say, well, a king isn't a tree, and a tree isn't a king. But you're obviously, with that metaphor, pointing to a relationship. But I think what Peugeot said there, and the enthusiasm with which Peugeot went at this and say, yeah, this is vitally important, because this is sort of this totalitarian way of thinking, which really doesn't work. And there's, at least in our synod, both sides are trying to live that out. And I think part of the reason the progressives, after 50 years, have lost their influence was because people are seeing that totalitarianism of the left play out, and they know it's coming, and so they see it coming, and they say, no, we're not going to go there. But then, when does the left go too far? I mean, that's, of course, Peterson's question. Well, when does the right go too far? Well, we kind of know that. And others are sort of also looking at the right in the CRC and saying, okay, yeah, we're not going with the left, but you over there on the right, you've got your own totalitarian tendencies too. So we're going to try to find a way to understand these nested identities. And actually, Lance made a point. He told a story about a home church in this video that I thought exemplified it well. And so I've been really trying to get out the language, and right now the mind of a machine is probably the best I can do. It of course has some relationship to the work that Paul Kingsnorth is doing in terms of the machine. This question, what does technology want? This anxious fear of totalitarian attempts of control to flatten the world and make it uniform. So it's this mind of a machine is a mind of modernity that reinforces uniformity and destroys the nested stacked, those are the words that Richard used, the nested stacked nature of identity. And so I am out of time. I have stuff to do. I'm hoping that tomorrow I'll have more time for some video making, but again, I've got other things in my life that require my attention, and the video making sort of fills in times that I can grab, even when I want to give a lot more attention to Synod. I want to have more synodical delegates here on the channel to talk about their experience. I want to have more CRC pastors on the channel to talk about what they've learned. There's a lot of vivid conversation going on CRC Voices. We've had a lot of new subscribers on CRC Voices. And just like I said, I had a conversation Monday with a friend of mine, a colleague who used to be here in Sacramento, and now he's in West Michigan. Another lunch today with another colleague today talking about Synod. Everybody wants to talk about Synod. Now, again, it's mostly at this certain level, but then a lot of pastors are asking, okay, well, how can I talk about this in my local church where these issues, figuring out the relationship between them, well, not so easy. So, yeah, I hope this helps, and here's a little something for homeroom for you, Grizz, and hopefully I'll have more time this week to make some videos, because I want to talk about this video more, because there's more stuff in this video that I think is really key There's Hunting Magic Eels, Richard Beck. There's a new, the paperback version of that book is coming out. It has some new chapters. I have to read through those chapters. Richard Beck asked me to do a blurb for the back, which I'm excited about now that I'm most of the way through the first edition of Hunting Magic Eels. I'm just completely astounded how that book touches on so many of the main points that we've been making in this little corner of the internet. I'm flabbergasted that it's really validation, because he's coming to these same realizations in many ways quite apart from our conversations and what we've been developing, and just really entranced by Lewis's space trilogy and how prescient that is for the issues that we're talking about. And I want to do some editing of the Kavanaugh conversation. I know the Kavanaugh conversation is long, and I know that there are long speeches, and I know that unless you're really into it, they can be kind of dry. But I actually think that was pretty important, so I want to do some editing, but I just have not had the time. So anyway, this is a little something for tomorrow for all of you, because you are lovely, wonderful people, and I appreciate your time and attention, and got to keep the conversation going. So leave a comment.